They found me by the 7-tier cake, my ex-husband and his flashy new wife. Their diamonds were bright, but their pity was blinding. They mocked my sweet little dress. They bragged about their 3rd vacation home in Aspen. They wanted to make sure I knew how small and lonely my life was, and how generous they were for this opulent wedding. I just smiled, clutched my small purse, and said nothing. I didn't have to. The groom's toast was next. The music was a low, warm hum in the ballroom. Strings and a soft piano. From my table, set just back from the dance floor, I could smell the heavy, sweet scent of the gardenia centerpieces. Thousands of them. The lights were dimmed to a soft gold, making the crystal glasses on every table glitter. My son, Michael, spun his new wife, Sarah, in a slow circle. Her white dress fanned out around her. His head was bowed toward hers, and he was smiling, saying something that made her laugh and press her face into his shoulder. A quiet, perfect joy swelled in my chest. I touched the gray lace of my own dress, a simple, understated thing. This moment was everything. This was the only thing that mattered. A server refilled my water, the clinking of the glass pitcher pulling me away for just a second. My eyes drifted across the room, past the laughing guests, to the front table, and just like that, the memory was there. It felt like another life. The chill of a lawyer's office, the scent of stale coffee and expensive paper. Richard sat across from me, his face impassive. He had already moved on. He had already started his new life with Brenda. "You're a drain, Eleanor," he had said, not with anger, but with finality, as if stating a simple fact. "You were always a drain on my ambition." I'm done. He wasn't wrong about my ambition. I hadn't had any, not for myself. It was all for Michael, for our home. A home Richard was happy to leave me with, along with the second mortgage I didn't know he'd taken out. He took the savings. He took the stocks. He took his tailored suits and his new, younger woman and left me with the keys to an empty house and a mountain of red ink. I gripped my small clutch purse in my lap. The leather was smooth and worn. The song ended, and the guests clapped. Michael kissed Sarah's forehead before leading her off the floor. I took a sip of water. After Richard left, the silence in that house was deafening. But underneath it, a different kind of ambition started to grow. It wasn't loud, like his. It was quiet and sharp. It was the ambition of survival. My small investment firm started in the spare bedroom. 18-hour days were normal. I learned to read markets, to trust my own gut. I lived on coffee and spreadsheets. My first big success wasn't a splurge. It was paying off that second mortgage. My second was opening Michael's college fund. I never moved. I never upgraded my car. Richard saw my quiet life, my simple gray dress, and he saw failure. He mistook modesty for poverty. Let him. His opinion had stopped mattering 15 years ago. My success wasn't for him. It was for this, for the gardenias and the string quartet and the look of pure, unburdened happiness on my son's face. I allowed myself a small, real smile. Then I saw them, across the polished floor, standing near the ostentatious 7-tier cake. Richard and Brenda. They had spotted me. Brenda, dripping in jewelry that flashed under the golden lights, leaned in and whispered something to Richard. He smirked. They started walking toward my table. The quiet joy in my chest tightened into a cold, familiar knot. They moved between the tables, a small, toxic cloud. Richard, 65 but dressed like a man of 45. His suit was expensive and just a little too tight, his hair a shade of black that did not exist in nature. Brenda, 58, was a showcase of sharp angles and bright clinking gold. Her perfume, a heavy, sweet floral, arrived at my table a second before she did. They stopped. Richard swished the dark liquor in his glass. Brenda held her champagne flute. "Eleanor, darling." Brenda's voice was high and thin. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my dress. "That's a sweet little dress. I did not move. I kept my hands folded over my clutch. "Did you get it at a consignment shop?" she asked. Her tone was light, as if she were paying me a compliment. "How wonderfully frugal of you." Richard let out a low, practiced chuckle. Now, Brenda, we can't all afford couture." He took a sip of his drink, his eyes mocking me over the rim of the glass. He leaned against the empty chair next to me, an invasion of my small space. "I'm actually surprised you're not working the coat check, Eleanor. You always did like to keep busy, finding little ways to earn." The cold knot in my stomach tightened. I focused on a point just past his shoulder, on a flower arrangement across the room. I would not give him the satisfaction of a reaction. "Must be hard," he continued, his voice dropping to a confidential murmur, "rattling around in that big old house all alone. We just closed on our 3rd vacation home, you know." He paused, then added, "Aspen." He said the word as if it were a title. Brenda nodded, her diamond earrings catching the golden light. "It's just lovely. But Richard, look around." She made a grand gesture with her free hand, indicating the entire ballroom. The string quartet, the servers in crisp white jackets, the ice sculptures. "It's opulent," she said, her voice rising just enough to turn the heads of the people at the next table. "It's just wonderful what our side of the family could provide for Michael. It's a joy to give him this." Then she leaned in closer. Her perfume was overpowering, cloying. "It really is a shame you couldn't really contribute." There it was. The final intended sting, the purpose of their visit, to stand in the middle of this grand hall and remind me that I was small, that I was poor, that they were generous and successful, and I was the lonely woman in the consignment dress. They both watched me, waiting. They were poised for tears, for an angry defense, for a bitter reminder of the divorce. They wanted me to fight back, to prove I was just as pathetic as they believed. I took a slow, quiet breath. I let the silence stretch, filling the space between us. Then I gave them a polite, thin smile. "Richard. Brenda." My voice was calm. It was even. It did not tremble. "It's Michael's day." I looked past them, toward the main table where Michael and Sarah were now laughing with her parents. "Please go enjoy the party." I turned my gaze back to them. My expression was placid, neutral. There was nothing for them to grab onto, no anger to feed on. Brenda's smile faltered. Her eyes narrowed. This was not the response she had practiced for. My calmness seemed to confuse her. Richard's smirk tightened. He stood up straight, a flush of annoyance rising on his neck. My polite dismissal had infuriated him more than any argument ever could. "Well," he said, clearing his throat loudly, "some people just don't know how to accept things gracefully, I suppose." He put a hand on Brenda's back, a gesture of retreat. "Come on, darling. Let's go get a real drink." They walked away. As they blended back into the crowd, I heard Brenda's high-pitched laugh. "So pathetic," she said, just loud enough for the words to carry back to me. I watched them go, watched them join a group of guests and accept compliments as if they were the hosts. They were convinced they had won, convinced they had landed their blows and left me wounded. I turned my attention back to the front of the room. The band leader was walking up to the microphone, tapping it lightly. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed, silencing the room. "If everyone could please take their seats. It's time for the toasts." My heart did not pound. My hands resting on my lap did not shake. I just sat and I waited. The lights in the ballroom dimmed further. A single spotlight hit the small stage near the band. The clinking of cutlery and the murmur of conversation softened. I watched Richard and Brenda at their table. It was one of the best, right at the edge of the dance floor. Richard was leaning back in his chair, one arm draped casually over the back. He looked like the lord of the manor. Brenda, seated beside him, smiled and nodded as a guest walked by and congratulated her. They were soaking it all in, accepting praise for the sheer scale of the event. The best man, a young man named Alex, stood up first. He fumbled with a small white card. "Wow," he said, his voice shaky. "This place, Michael, I remember when we thought a fancy dinner was the 2-for-1 special at the campus diner." A polite wave of laughter rolled through the room. "But seriously," Alex continued, "I've never seen my friend happier. And Sarah, you've made him a better man. He almost knows how to cook now." More laughter. "To Michael and Sarah, may you always be this happy." The room applauded as he sat down. The atmosphere was light, warm. Next, Sarah's sister, Chloe, the maid of honor, took the microphone. She was already crying before she said a word. "Sarah," she sniffed, laughing and wiping at her eyes. "You are my best friend in the entire world. I have never seen you as happy as you are with Michael." She told a short, sweet story about them as children, playing wedding in their backyard. "Michael, thank you for loving my sister the way you do. Welcome to the family. To the happy couple." More applause and a few sniffles from the tables nearby. This was how toasts were supposed to be. Warm, loving, and safe. Then the band leader stepped up again. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, a few words from our groom, Michael." The applause was the loudest yet. Michael stood up. He looked so much like his father, physically. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the same dark hair. But that's where it ended. Michael was solid. His strength was quiet, not for show. He walked to the microphone and gently kissed Sarah's hand before she let him go. He adjusted the mic, his eyes scanning the room, landing on his new wife. "Wow," he began, his voice clear and steady. It filled the entire space. "Thank you all so much for being here. Sarah, you look incredible. I am the luckiest man in the world." Sarah beamed, her love for him visible to everyone. "I want to start by thanking my new family," Michael said, turning his head toward Sarah's parents. "Mark, Diane, thank you for welcoming me into your family and for raising this incredible, intelligent, and compassionate woman." Sarah's parents raised their glasses, their faces full of pride. The room felt full of affection. Michael paused. He took one deliberate breath. The room was perfectly silent, waiting. His gaze moved from Sarah's parents. It swept past my table. It moved across the room until it landed precisely on the front table. "On Richard. I'd like to take a moment," Michael said, his voice perfectly even, "to thank my father." I watched Richard. I saw his whole body change. His shoulders went back. His chest puffed out. He straightened his tie and lifted his chin. He picked up his glass of dark liquor, preparing to raise it high. Brenda, beside him, placed her hand on his arm, her smile wide, sharing in the reflected glory. Michael's gaze stayed locked on him. He did not smile. For showing up, the two words dropped into the silent ballroom. It was not a joke. It was not sarcasm. It was a statement. A simple, flat, brutal fact. Richard's arm froze, his glass hovering halfway to his mouth. His smirk collapsed, dissolving into a slack-jawed mask of confusion. The table next to mine went completely still. Someone coughed. A fork clattered against a plate somewhere in the back, a sound that seemed to echo in the sudden, awful silence. The air in the room was no longer warm. It was thin. It was sharp. Brenda's hand tightened on Richard's arm, her red-nailed fingers digging into his sleeve. Her smile was gone, her mouth slightly open. Richard's face, which had been so smug seconds before, began to turn a deep, blotchy red. And Michael just stood there at the microphone, perfectly still. He hadn't moved. He hadn't looked away. He was not finished speaking. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was no longer an awkward pause. It was a heavy, suffocating pressure. I could hear the tiny hiss of the candles on the table. Richard's face was a terrible, blotchy red. His mouth was open, his glass still frozen in the air. Brenda looked as if she had been struck. Her eyes, wide and horrified, darted from Michael to Richard as if begging him to fix it, to say something. But he was paralyzed. Before a single guest could cough, before a whisper could start, Michael turned his head. It was not a quick glance. It was a slow, deliberate rotation. His gaze left his father's table. It passed over the stunned faces of the guests. And then it found me. His eyes locked with mine. The cold pressure in the room vanished. It was replaced by a warmth that flowed directly from him to me. All the ice he had shown his father was gone. His expression softened. His eyes were clear, and they were filled with a love so strong it made my own eyes burn. But the real reason, Michael said, and his voice, which had been so flat, was now strong and thick with emotion. It rang out in the quiet room. The only reason we are all here, in this specific ballroom. His hand swept out, gesturing to the high, coffered ceilings, the thousands of flowers, the crystal chandeliers that dripped with golden light. Eating this incredible food, listening to this amazing band, is because of one person. He kept his eyes on me. Every person in that room turned, following his gaze, until 200 pairs of eyes were fixed on my small back table. On my simple gray lace dress. My father and his wife, he said. And I saw Richard flinch at the words. They love to talk about their success. They love to talk about their new homes and their expensive vacations. Brenda's head snapped up. Her look of shock was replaced by a flash of pure, venomous anger. But she was trapped, held in place by the public setting. But they never, Michael continued, his voice rising, talk about my mother's success. After the divorce, this woman, he raised his free hand, not pointing, but presenting me to the room. This woman, Eleanor, built an entire business from scratch. She did it with no help from anyone. She worked 18-hour days while they were on those vacations. She sacrificed everything, not for herself, but for me. A small sound, a sob, escaped my throat. My hand flew to my mouth to hold it in. I hadn't even realized I was crying. The tears came silently, blurring the golden lights of the room. I had never, not once, heard him speak of this. When Sarah and I got engaged, Michael's voice was steady now, full of conviction. We looked at places like this. We worried about starting our new life in debt. We worried about how we'd ever afford the wedding of our dreams. He smiled, a real, beautiful smile that reached his eyes. I went to my mom, he said. I was nervous. I was just going to ask for a little help. Maybe a few $1,000s for the deposit, he paused. My mom didn't blink. She didn't lecture me about money or tell me to be frugal. She just smiled, the same way she's smiling right now. And she said, Michael, it's already handled. You just be happy. My son, my wonderful son, turned his body fully toward me. He was no longer addressing the room. He was speaking only to me. He raised his glass high. Mom, I love you, and thank you. He paused, taking one final deep breath, letting the anticipation fill every corner of the room. For paying for this entire $100,000 wedding yourself, the words landed. $100,000. The number, so specific, so large, hung in the air. The silence that followed was a different kind. It was not awkward. It was not angry. It was the sound of 200 people catching their breath. The sound of 200 minds replaying the scene from earlier. Brenda's mockery, Richard's arrogance, my quiet, polite smile. I stared at Michael, my heart too full to even beat. He was still holding his glass up, his eyes locked on mine. Then, across the room at the table next to mine, Sarah's father, Mark, pushed back his chair. He stood up. He began to clap. Mark, Sarah's father, was still clapping. His applause was a single sharp sound in the stunned ballroom. Then Sarah's mother, Diane, stood up beside him and joined in. Beside her, Alex, the best man, shot to his feet, not just clapping, but letting out a low, supportive whistle. In a second, the sound was everywhere. It wasn't the polite applause from the earlier toasts. It was loud. It was a wave of sound, an ovation. Chairs scraped loudly against the hardwood floor as people stood up. Table after table. Michael's friends from college, who knew the real story. Sarah's entire family, who had watched me write checks for the deposits. My own few colleagues from the firm, who knew exactly how hard I had worked. They all stood, their faces turned toward me, their hands clapping. I just sat there. My hand was still held to my mouth, as if I could hold back the sobs that were shaking my shoulders. The sound of their applause washed over me. I couldn't move. I felt small, but not in the way Richard had intended. I felt small in the face of this huge, warm wave of support. My eyes, through the blur of my tears, moved past the standing, applauding guests. My gaze found the front table. Richard and Brenda were still seated. They were the only ones. They were two small islands of frozen silence in a standing, roaring room. They were pinned to their chairs by the weight of 200 people staring. Richard was staring down. His face was no longer red. It was a pale, sickly white. He was looking, unseeing, into his half-full glass of liquor. He was perfectly, completely still. His Aspen home, his couture suit, his bragging about his side of the family paying, all of it had just evaporated. Michael's simple public words had turned his entire persona into a lie. Brenda was worse. Her face was chalky, her lipstick a harsh red slash against her white skin. Her mouth was a thin, tight line. She wasn't looking at Richard. She was looking at the guests at the table next to hers, people she had probably been bragging to just an hour before. They were clapping, but they were also staring right at her, openly. The whispers started then. I could see them. A woman at that next table leaned toward her husband, her hand shielding her mouth. Her eyes, wide with understanding, were fixed on Brenda. The husband nodded, his own expression a mix of shock and disgust. The word contribute seemed to hang in the air, unspoken but understood by everyone. The mockery about my consignment dress now seemed petty and cruel. Brenda's hand, the one with the large, flashy rings, fumbled for her water glass on the table. She missed. Her fingers knocked against the side, a loud clink that no one but me could hear over the applause. She snatched her hand back and dropped it into her lap. She looked like she was going to be sick. The applause continued for a full, long minute. Finally, slowly, it began to die down. People started to sit, but the energy in the room was completely changed. The light, warm atmosphere was gone. It was replaced by a sharp, clear silence. On the stage, Michael had not moved. Now he put the microphone back in its stand. He turned and smiled at Sarah, who was crying and laughing at the same time. He took her hand. He didn't look back at his father's table, not even a glance. He and Sarah stepped off the small stage together. They bypassed Richard's table completely, as if it wasn't even there. They began walking, their steps purposeful, directly toward me. They walked across the empty dance floor. Every guest in the room tracked their movement. The silence was so complete that I could hear the faint swish of Sarah's dress with each step. My tears were hot on my face. I tried to wipe them away with my trembling fingers, but they kept coming. I felt exposed, sitting at this small table while the entire room watched me cry. Michael's eyes never left mine. His face was set, not with the anger he had shown his father, but with a deep, powerful resolve. Sarah was beside him, her hand tucked into his arm. She was no longer crying. She looked proud. They reached my table. I fumbled to stand up, my chair leg catching on the carpet. "Eleanor," Sarah said. Her voice was soft. She let go of Michael's arm and leaned down, wrapping her arms around my shoulders while I was still half-seated. "Thank you," she whispered into my ear. "Thank you for this. It's perfect." She squeezed me, then stepped back, her hand resting on my shoulder. Then Michael was in front of me. He was so tall. He looked down at me, his son, my son, the man I had raised. "Mom," he said. His voice was thick. He reached down, took both of my hands, and gently pulled me to my feet. I stood up, still unsteady. "You didn't," I started to say. "Michael, you didn't have to do that." "Yes," he said, his voice low and certain. "I did." He didn't let go of my hands. He just looked at me for a second, his eyes searching my face. Then he let go, stepped forward, and pulled me into a hug. He wrapped his arms around me completely, holding me tightly, just as he had when he was a little boy and had a bad dream. I buried my face in the crisp, clean fabric of his suit jacket. I could smell the faint scent of his cologne. I closed my eyes and just held on to him, shaking. "I heard them, Mom," he whispered, his voice so low it was only for me. His words vibrated through his chest. "Before the toasts. I was coming to find you, and I heard them." I pulled back just enough to look at him. His jaw was tight. "I heard what they said to you. About your dress. About contributing." My breath hitched. He had heard it. He had heard all of it. The mockery, the insults. He had carried that anger with him all the way to the stage. "I wasn't going to let that stand," he said. "Not today. This is your party. You did this." I couldn't speak. I just nodded, a fresh wave of tears blurring my vision of him. He pulled me back against him, his hand rubbing my back in a slow, comforting circle. "I love you, Mom." "I love you, Michael," I whispered into his suit. "I love you so much." From across the ballroom, there was a sudden, loud tap, tap, tap of a drumstick against a microphone. "All right." The band leader's voice boomed, cheerful and bright, breaking the intense silence. "A beautiful moment. Let's hear it one more time for Michael and Sarah. And for the mother of the groom, Eleanor." Another warmer round of applause started, less stunned this time, more celebratory. The band leader continued. "And now Michael and Sarah have a request. They'd like to invite everyone up to the dance floor." A lively, upbeat song started. The brass section came in loud. The volume was a sudden relief, filling the room, giving people permission to move and talk. Michael let me go, but kept one arm around my shoulders. Sarah took my hand. "Come dance with us, Eleanor," she said, smiling. "In a minute," I said, squeezing her hand. "You two go on. This is your night." Michael kissed my cheek. "We'll be right here." He and Sarah turned and walked onto the dance floor, and a crowd of their friends instantly swarmed them, hugging them, laughing. The party, which had been frozen in place, roared back to life. I stood by my table, my heart so full it ached. I watched my son and his new wife. I watched the guests laughing and finding drinks. I looked over the room. At the flowers, the food, the happy people. My party. My eyes found the front table. The spell was broken. No one was looking at them anymore. The guests at the tables nearby were pointedly turned away, talking to each other, getting up to dance. Richard and Brenda were alone, invisible. Richard was no longer looking at his glass. He was looking at Michael, who was on the dance floor, laughing, his back to his father. Richard's face was pale. He pushed his chair back. The legs made a loud, scraping sound on the floor, but no one heard it over the music. He stood up. He didn't look at Brenda. He just threw his napkin down onto his half-eaten, expensive meal. Brenda looked up at him, her face a mask of confusion and fury. He said something to her, short and sharp. She grabbed her small, glittering purse from the table. She stood up. Her movements were jerky, angry. She didn't bother to fix her dress. They didn't say goodbye to anyone. They didn't look at me or at Michael. Richard put a hand on Brenda's back, not with affection, but with force. He pushed her, guiding her away from the dance floor. They walked, stiff-backed, between the tables. They were not walking toward the bar. They were walking toward the main exit of the ballroom. They were leaving their son's wedding. I watched them go. Richard walked quickly, his head down, pushing through the ornate double doors into the lobby. Brenda stumbled, catching her heel, before following him out. The doors swung closed behind them, the whoosh of air completely lost in the sound of the band. No one else saw them leave. The party was too loud, too happy, too alive. The dance floor was full. The moment their presence was gone, it was as if they had never been there at all. The air at my table felt lighter. I turned back to the room. My son was spinning his new wife in a circle, both of them laughing. The golden light caught the sparkles on Sarah's dress. I sat down, my legs weak. My heartbeat was finally slowing. The tears had stopped, leaving my face feeling tight and cool. I picked up my water glass and took a long, slow sip. The band was playing a fast song I didn't recognize, all horns and a strong drum beat. The sound was a joyful wail. Eleanor. I looked up. Sarah's parents, Mark and Diane, were standing at my table. I hadn't seen them approach. That was... Mark started, then stopped. He was a kind man with a gentle face. He just shook his head, a small smile on his lips. That was quite a toast. Diane, I said, my voice a little rough. Mark, please sit. Only for a moment, Diane said. She sat in the chair Richard had leaned against. Mark stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. We just wanted to come over. She reached across the table and put her hand on my arm. Her skin was warm. We knew, of course. We knew you were handling the finances. But we just wanted to say thank you. It's an incredible wedding, Eleanor, Mark added. Truly. But that's not it. No, Diane said, her eyes meeting mine. We wanted to thank you for the man you raised. Michael is a good man. He's loyal. He's kind. And he loves our Sarah completely. You did that. You raised him. Her words hit me harder than any insult from Brenda. This simple, quiet praise. This acknowledgement. He's easy to love, I said, my voice watery again. We are so happy to be family now, Mark said, squeezing his wife's shoulder. Truly, we should have you over for dinner as soon as we're all back from the honeymoons. I would love that, I said. And I meant it. Okay, they're dragging me onto the dance floor, Mark said, as one of his nephews waved him over. We'll see you in a bit, Eleanor. They left, and I was alone again, but not lonely. I was just at peace. I watched the party, my party, the one I had paid for. But the money felt secondary now. The vindication was not about the $100,000. It was about the look on Michael's face. It was about Diane's warm hand on my arm. The fast song ended, and the band immediately shifted. The lights dimmed again, turning a soft, warm blue. A slow song began, a simple piano melody. I saw Michael say something to Sarah. He kissed her, and then she turned and walked off the floor toward her mother. Michael turned and walked toward me. He stopped in front of my table, just as he had before. He held out his hand. Mom, he said, his voice quiet. May I have this dance? I looked at his outstretched hand. My son. My whole world. I didn't hesitate. I put my hand in his, and he gently pulled me to my feet. He led me onto the dance floor, past the other couples, to a space near the center. He put one hand on my back, and I put my hand on his shoulder. We began to move, a simple, slow circle. Are you okay? He asked, his voice a low rumble. I leaned my head against his shoulder. The fabric of his suit was smooth against my cheek. I closed my eyes. I am, I whispered. I'm more than okay. We danced in silence for a minute. The music was soft, just piano and strings. I could feel his steady breathing. He's gone, I said, so quietly I wasn't sure he heard me. I know, Michael said. I saw them leave. He didn't sound angry anymore. He just sounded finished. It doesn't matter, he said. He doesn't matter. This, he squeezed my hand, is what matters. I pulled my head back to look at him. His eyes were clear. He was happy. He was unburdened. He was starting his new life, free of his father's shadows. I had spent 15 years building a quiet success, not for revenge, but for this. To give my son this day, to give him this freedom. I looked around the ballroom. I wasn't the lonely woman in the gray dress, sitting at a table in the back. I was at the center of the room, held in my son's arms. I was surrounded by the warmth, the light, the music, the flowers. I was surrounded by the love I had built. My revenge was never loud. It was never meant to be. It was just this. It was his happiness. Michael smiled at me. Happy, Mom? I smiled back, the tears gone. Very happy.